The rain began the way most mountain storms do, soft and steady, like a reminder that the forest always drinks first. But on that particular August evening in North Carolina's Pisgah National Forest, the rhythm shifted. The sky darkened in ways that didn't feel ordinary. The thunder didn't just rumble, it rolled across the ridges like a warning. And then the clouds gave way not in drops, but in sheets. It wasn't long before creeks that usually meandered quietly beside trails turned into rivers. Pisgah is a place people visit to feel small in the best of ways. Towering hardwood streams that sparkle in morning light. The call of forest animals echoing between valleys. It is the kind of landscape that makes you believe the world is still intact. But that night, the balance cracked. What should have been a passing storm transformed into a torrent that tore apart trails, roads, and even the roots of centuries-old oaks. Flash floods are a part of life in Appalachia, but rarely had people seen something this fierce. Ethan, a college sophomore, spending his summer as a volunteer, was finishing his shift at the Wildlife Rescue Center when he got the first call, swollen creeks sweeping through rural roads, houses flooding and residents trapped. Alongside him was Claire, a retired nurse who had spent her post-career years giving time to the sanctuary. She looked at him and said quietly, "We'll be busy tonight." She was right. By midnight, the Still Fork River had jumped its banks, swallowing cabins, barns, and pastures. Downed power lines sparked against the water. The storm's roar was deafening, but beneath it a quieter tragedy was playing out, wild animals scrambling for higher ground. Deer crashing through fences, raccoons clinging to floating logs. Even a wolf pack howling in confusion from a ridge. The next morning, when the rain finally eased, the silence was unsettling. Roads were impassable, but volunteers began spreading out on foot. They weren't just looking for people. They were searching for signs of life of any kind. Floods don't discriminate whether you're a family with a farmhouse or a black bear, mother with cubs. Survival depends on luck and higher ground. Statistics often feel cold, but they matter. According to state wildlife agencies, thousands of wild animals are displaced or killed during Appalachian floods each decade. For every deer or fox that makes it to safety, others don't. Sanctuaries across the region quietly prepare for this reality. After every storm, phone lines light up with calls, "I found a baby owl in my yard," or "There's a raccoon trapped in my shed." This time the calls would come faster and heavier. Ethan and Claire volunteered to check the lower valley where the river had carved a new path overnight. The mud pulled at their boots. Every step was a reminder of how much power water carries when gravity tips the balance. They passed uprooted trees, their roots tangled like giant knuckles and fences twisted into useless shapes. Once in a while, they found a survivor, a soaked rabbit trembling in the brush, a turtle overturned on its back. Each one was lifted gently, carried in boxes or wrapped in towels, and noted for transfer to the animal sanctuary. But the landscape held more than scattered survivors. It carried absence. No bird calls, no chirping crickets. Just the dull sound of dripping water and the hollow groan of broken timber. That silence was what unsettled Claire most. "The forest doesn't go quiet unless it's hurting," she said softly. "Here's where a lesson often hides in disaster. We notice what's gone before we notice what remains. We hear silence before we hear recovery. Nature, like people, takes time to find its voice again." As they pushed further into the wreckage, Ethan thought about the sheer randomness of survival. Why had one rabbit clung to life while an entire den of fox kits might be gone? Why had some families on the riverbank escaped while their neighbors didn't? It wasn't fair. And yet, it was the reality of storms. There is no fairness in floodwater. That morning's search could have been another tally in a long line of rescues and losses. But then from beneath a pile of waterlogged boards, Ethan thought he heard something faint. He paused. Claire stopped too. They listened. It wasn't wind. It wasn't the drip of water. It was something higher, thinner. A cry. This is the fresh perspective the storm forced on them. Even in chaos, the forest whispers. You have to stop long enough, care enough to hear it. Before we move on, let's pause here with a small reflection. Natural disasters remind us that resilience isn't just about human communities. Wild animals carry their own stories of survival, their own quiet heroics. When we think about floods, we often picture destroyed homes, broken bridges, and downed power lines. We forget the unseen an owl's nest swept away a fawn separated from its mother, a black bear cub, clinging to a branch until exhaustion wins. That unseen loss is real, and yet, in that loss, seeds of healing are planted when people choose to notice, to act, to rescue. For Ethan and Claire, the cry they heard that morning changed the course of the day. They looked at each other uncertain if they were imagining it. But when the sound came again weaker this time, they knew something small, something alive was trapped beneath the debris. What they would find hidden in that ruined landscape would not only test their skills as rescuers, but also challenge their understanding of what animals truly need to survive. Food and shelter matter, yes, but sometimes healing begins with something far less expected. And that's where our story truly begins, because beneath that broken pile of timber, a tiny life was waiting, and the forest was holding its breath. When Ethan and Claire pulled back the boards, they didn't just uncover a survivor. They uncovered a story that would ripple through the sanctuary and into the hearts of everyone who heard it. Ethan knelt first. His boots sank deep into the mud, but he didn't notice. That sound, thin, fragile, almost swallowed by the weight of silence, was impossible to ignore. Claire leaned close beside him. They listened again. A second cry, weaker than the first. It was the kind of sound that seemed to bypass the ears and go straight to the chest. He pushed aside a soggy beam. Claire steadied the pile, whispering easy. "Don't spook it." Both of them worked carefully, peeling back layer after layer of storm wreckage. The smell of wet timber, the sting of mold already forming in the damp, it didn't matter. The cries grew clearer. Then, under a warped cupboard and a tangle of roots, Ethan saw movement. At first, it looked like nothing more than a patch of mud with fur clinging to it. But when a tiny paw twitched, his breath caught. He reached in, palms open. What he lifted into the daylight was hardly more than a handful of life. A black bear cub, maybe 2 months old, soaked to the skin, his ribs pressing against thin fur, his whole body trembling. For a moment, no one spoke. The cub blinked, one eye half swollen, the other wide and frightened. His cry broke again, raw and high-pitched, the kind of sound that turns laughter into stillness. Here's the truth about black bear cubs at birth. They weigh less than a pound, blind and helpless. They stay with their mothers for at least 1.5 years, learning everything: where to find berries, how to climb trees, how to prepare for hibernation. Without her, survival is nearly impossible. Orphaned cubs often starve because they don't know how to eat properly. Some wander aimlessly, too weak to forage, too inexperienced to avoid predators. Others, desperate for food, stray into towns where their fear of humans is their only defense, and once that fear fades, their lives often end early. That's why Ethan and Claire both knew, even without words, that what they held was a miracle and a crisis rolled into one. This cub had survived a flood that took barns and cabins, a flood strong enough to rip bridges from their foundations. Yet he was alone, vulnerable, and fading fast. Claire took off her jacket and wrapped the cub tightly. He fit against her chest as if he were a fragile child. She murmured, "Shh, little one, you're all right now." Her words meant nothing in language, but everything in comfort. The cub quieted for a moment, pressing his nose against the warmth. Here's where perspective shifts sometimes. The most powerful rescue begins with nothing more than being present. No syringes, no medicine, just warmth and steadiness. We often think wild animals survive purely on instinct, but instinct doesn't erase the need for security. That's as true for a cub as it is for a person. They began the trek back toward the trailhead, cradling their bundle. The mud pulled at their steps, but they kept moving. Along the way, Ethan thought of other rescues he'd read about: an owl pulled from floodwaters, feathers plastered flat, a fawn lifted from a roadside ditch, even a bobcat kitten discovered clinging to debris after a storm in West Virginia years earlier. Each story carried the same note: nature gives second chances only rarely, and when it does, it requires human hands willing to help. The cub cried again, softer now, as if exhaustion had dulled his protest. Claire tightened her arms, whispering again. Ethan felt a pang of both hope and worry. He asked, "Do you think he'll make it?" Claire didn't answer right away. Finally, she said, "He has a chance. That's all we can give him. There's a lesson here worth carrying. A rescue isn't about certainty. It's about possibility. You don't step in because you know you'll succeed. You step in because not stepping in guarantees failure. That principle applies to people, to communities, and yes, to wild animals." Back at the edge of the valley, they radioed the team at the animal sanctuary. A van rolled in its tires, crunching over broken gravel. Inside were clean towels, a heat pack, and the steady presence of Dr. Madison, the sanctuary's director. When she saw the bundle in Claire's arms, she didn't waste time with questions. She opened the towel, assessed the cub quickly, and gave a quiet nod. "He's weak, dehydrated, but he's alive. Let's get him in." As they transferred the cub into a carrier lined with soft cloth, he clutched at the fabric with surprising force for his size. His paws were no bigger than Ethan's thumbs, yet his grip was desperate, insistent, as if saying, "Don't let me go again." Ethan bent low and whispered, "We won't." From the outside, the story could seem simple. Volunteers find a cub, take the cub to a wildlife rescue, end scene. But within it lies something deeper, the reminder that survival is rarely about strength alone. It's about connection. The cub had lost his mother, his siblings, and his home. All that remained was his will to cling, and that was enough to summon two strangers into action. Let's widen the lens for a moment. Black bears are among the most adaptable wild animals in North America. They live in forests, mountains, and even near human neighborhoods. They eat berries, nuts, insects, and occasionally small animals. They can weigh over 300 pounds as adults. But no amount of adaptability prepares a cub for being orphaned in a flood, and no amount of instinct can replace the lessons a mother teaches. That's why wildlife rescue teams exist, not to tame, but to bridge the gap between disaster and survival. This discovery also reminds us of something about ourselves. We often assume wild animals and humans are divided by some great wall. But vulnerability is universal. Hunger, fear, exhaustion. These are languages both species understand. That recognition is what drives sanctuaries, volunteers, and countless unseen helpers to act. As the van pulled away, Ethan and Claire stood watching. The forest behind them was still scarred, still silent. But for the first time since the storm, there was also movement toward healing. They didn't know what the cub's future would be, but they had carried him out of silence into possibility. And that was enough for one day. When the van doors closed, the cub's story was only beginning. At the sanctuary, under the careful watch of Dr. Madison and her team, they would soon discover that the hardest wounds to treat weren't the ones on his body, but the ones carved deep into his spirit. The van bumped down the winding road, tires splashing through puddles left by the storm. Inside, the black bear cub huddled in the carrier, still wrapped in Claire's jacket. His small chest rose and fell too fast, each breath rattling. Claire kept her hand on the towel, whispering, "Almost there, little one." The sanctuary sat on a ridge just above the flood line. From the outside, it didn't look like much an old farmhouse, a few outbuildings, fences patched more with hope than money. But for years, this animal rescue center had been the last chance for wild animals. No one else could help. Deer hit by cars, owls with broken wings, raccoons separated from their mothers. This place had seen it all. At the door stood Dr. Madison. Mid-40s, her face carried lines not from age but from years of long nights and heavy choices. She didn't wait for greetings. She lifted the carrier from Ethan's arms and walked straight inside. "Follow me." The examination room was small but organized. A steel table stood in the center, surrounded by shelves lined with syringes, bandages, and jars of formula. Madison opened the carrier, and the cub whimpered, clawing at the towel as if afraid of losing the last thing holding him together. "Steady now," she murmured, sliding him gently onto the table. Her hands moved fast, checking temperature, gums, heartbeat. "He's hypothermic, dehydrated, malnourished, but he's got fight." Ethan stood frozen, unsure what to do. Claire touched his shoulder. "Watch closely. This is where survival begins." Madison gave subcutaneous fluids, then warmed milk through a syringe. At first, the cub resisted turning his head. But when a few drops touched his tongue, he latched weakly, sucking, as though he'd remembered for the first time what hunger felt like. "That's it," Madison whispered, her voice low and steady. "You've got this." It wasn't dramatic. No swelling music, no sudden transformation. Just tiny swallows, one after another, and a little more life returning with each. This is what wildlife rescue really looks like: ordinary actions repeated patiently until extraordinary results emerge. Here's an example worth pausing on. Years earlier, the sanctuary had taken in an owl whose wing had been shattered by a storm. Day after day, volunteers cleaned the wound, adjusted bandages, and fed him bits of mice. Progress was almost invisible until one morning he spread both wings wide. Not to fly, but simply to stretch without pain. That moment was a victory. Rescue work is like that, tiny steps adding up to miracles. As the cub finished his formula, Madison wrapped him in a heated towel. She pressed him against her chest, letting him hear her heartbeat. He stilled, though his small body kept trembling. She looked at Ethan and Claire. He'll need round-the-clock care, feedings every 2 hours. Monitoring, and that's before we even touch his trauma. That word hung in the air. Trauma. It was easy to treat wounds, easier still to feed an empty stomach. But what about fear so deep it kept a wild animal awake even in safety? That part no syringe could reach, and this is where the lesson deepens. Sanctuaries don't just mend bodies, they hold space for fear, confusion, and grief. Animals feel those things too, though in ways we're still learning to understand. A black bear cub ripped from his mother's care doesn't just lose food and warmth. He loses the very blueprint of survival. A sanctuary becomes more than shelter. It becomes a bridge between despair and a future. Ethan helped prepare the cub's temporary enclosure. Soft bedding, a heat lamp, and a bowl of clean water. He watched as Madison lowered the cub in. For a moment, the cub clawed at her arm, desperate not to be left. Then he collapsed into the bedding, breathing shallow, one paw still stretched outward as though reaching for someone unseen. Claire leaned against the wall, her eyes moist. "You'd think after years of nursing people I'd be used to this," she whispered. "But every life that struggles, it never gets easier." Ethan nodded. "Feels like he's trusting us with everything he has left." Here's the fresh perspective as sanctuaries teach the line between human and wild isn't as solid as we imagine. Compassion is the one language spoken across that line. Volunteers come not because they expect thanks, but because they recognize that helping another life, any life, changes both sides. Outside, the storm damage was still visible. Broken fences, fallen trees. A fox in another enclosure barked uneasily. Yet inside the little clinic, hope was rebuilding in small breaths and steady hands. Wildlife sanctuaries are not glamorous. They are messy, exhausting, and often underfunded. Volunteers. Clean cages, haul water. Prepare endless meals of fruit, vegetables, insects, and sometimes roadkill. They mourn when an animal doesn't make it. They cheer when one finally runs free again into the forest. And through it all, they keep showing up. That's the quiet power behind places like this. They stand in the gap where the wild and the human collide, refusing to let loss have the last word. As the cub drifted into restless sleep, Madison dimmed the lights. "He's safe for tonight," she said. Then she turned to Ethan and Claire. "But this is just the beginning. The hardest part isn't the hunger. It's teaching him that the world isn't only dangerous. That was the mystery yet to unfold." A cub who had survived floodwaters still carried inside him a storm that wouldn't quiet down. And sometimes survival depends not on strength or food, but on something far more unexpected. The sanctuary could mend his body, but nothing seemed to reach his spirit. Night after night, he cried and clawed at the dark, until one ordinary object pulled from a forgotten box would change everything. The cub should have been safe now. He had warmth, clean water, soft bedding, and steady hands to care for him. His belly was no longer empty and his wounds were treated. Yet night after night, the sanctuary echoed with his cries. At first, the staff thought hunger was the cause. They adjusted his feedings, increased the formula, and even added bits of softened fruit when he seemed strong enough. But nothing changed. He ate, yes. But as soon as the lights dimmed and the quiet of night settled, the wailing began again. Thin, sharp sounds that pulled at every heart within earshot. Ethan, who volunteered on night shifts, often sat by the enclosure, whispering through the wire. "You're safe now, little guy. Nobody's going to hurt you." His words did nothing. The cub's small body stayed rigid, his wide eyes darting at every shadow. He paced, tripped over his own paws, whimpered, then collapsed from exhaustion, only to start again minutes later. Claire tried another approach. She sang in the low, steady tone she used years ago with her patients' old lullabies that had soothed human children through sickness. The cub listened, head tilted, but the cries returned as soon as the song ended. That was when Dr. Tyr. Madison voiced what everyone was thinking, but no one wanted to admit. If he can't rest, he won't make it. This is something not many realize. Rest is as vital as food. In both humans and wild animals, sleep is when healing happens. The immune system strengthens the body, repairs the mind, resets. Deprive a body of rest, and even the best medicine loses its power. A starving animal can recover if it sleeps. But a well-fed animal kept awake by fear will slowly burn out. Here lies the deeper truth. Trauma doesn't vanish when the immediate danger ends. For this black bear cub, the floodwaters were gone, the wreckage left behind. Yet inside him, the storm kept raging. His tiny body held the memory of separation, of loss, of nearly drowning. That memory was stronger than warmth, louder than comfort. Ethan once asked Madison, "Is this normal for wild animals?" Her reply was both scientific and deeply human. Fear is survival's teacher. For cubs, it keeps them close to their mothers, keeps them wary of predators. But when the mother is gone, fear becomes the only thing they know. Without balance, fear consumes them. She explained that orphaned cubs, especially those found after natural disasters, often struggle more with trauma than with physical wounds. They're restless, prone to overreacting, and sometimes even rejecting food. In the wild, the mother bear would calm them with presence, by touch, by scent, by rhythm of her body. Without her, cubs live in a constant state of alertness, a readiness that drains life instead of protecting it. This wasn't the sanctuary's first experience. Madison recalled a bobcat rescued years ago found shivering in a barn after a storm. Though his injuries healed quickly, his fear never faded. He would lash out at the slightest noise, tearing his bedding, refusing rest. Eventually, he survived, only because the team found creative ways to provide comfort sound machines with forest noises, covered spaces to mimic dens, and patient care. That bobcat lived, but he carried his trauma like a shadow for years, and now the cubs seem to be walking the same path. Here's a lesson we often overlook. Healing isn't just the absence of wounds, it's the return of peace. Without peace, the body remains trapped in survival mode, and survival mode is not a place where growth happens. Ethan journaled about it one night, scribbling between rounds of checking the cub. He wrote, "Maybe what he needs isn't more medicine. Maybe it's something we can't measure." The fresh perspective here is subtle but profound. Sometimes what saves a life isn't a new treatment, but the recognition that fear itself can be fatal. We tend to think of trauma as invisible, something animals simply move past. But trauma is real, lodged deep in memory and body. And just like us, wild animals sometimes need more than food and safety. They need something that tells them the world is not all danger. So the team tried small experiments. They placed the cub near other recovering animals, hoping the sounds of companionship would soothe him. They added extra bedding for burrowing, thinking maybe the closeness of a den would help. They even left faint forest sounds playing through a speaker, streams, crickets, bird calls. For a moment, each trick seemed to work. The cub would pause, listen, even rest for a few breaths. But soon the cycle returned, pacing, crying, collapsing. The volunteers began to carry the weight. Lack of sleep stretched them thin, too. They swapped stories of their own nights of worry, of children who wouldn't stop crying, of parents they once cared for in illness, of their own moments of fear after losing someone. They realized that sitting with this cub in his storm connected them to something they all shared, the human need for reassurance. Claire put it best one morning as dawn broke over the sanctuary. We think we're saving him, but really, he's reminding us how much fear shapes us all. Still, time was slipping. Each day the cub grew physically stronger, but his restlessness threatened to undo it all. And that's where the quiet mystery of rescue begins, when ordinary tools fail. Hope often arrives from the most unexpected places. The sanctuary had tried everything they knew: food, warmth, comfort, even the sounds of the forest itself. But nothing touched the cub's fear. Then one evening, Claire reached into a dusty donation box and pulled out something so ordinary, so unlikely, that no one could have predicted it would change everything. It was near midnight when Claire noticed the cardboard box in the corner of the supply room. Most of its contents had little value for wild animals. Old board games, action figures, puzzles with missing pieces. The box had been part of a local school's donation drive after the flood. Volunteers hadn't sorted it yet. But on top lay something unexpected. A teddy bear, slightly worn with one ear bent sideways. Claire picked it up, turning it in her hands. Its fur was patchy, its seams stretched from years of hugs. "Silly thing," she whispered. Yet in that moment she thought of her own grandson, who even at 8 still refused to sleep without his blanket. She thought of hospital nights, long ago, when frightened children calmed only after a nurse tucked a stuffed animal beside them. And she thought of the cub crying endlessly in the dark. She carried the teddy into the cub's enclosure. Ethan followed, skeptical. "You think that'll work?" Claire shrugged. "I don't know, but it can't hurt to try." The cub was pacing again, eyes wide, his cry raspier than before. Claire knelt and gently placed the teddy on the bedding. For a second, the cub froze. His ears twitched, his nose twitched. Then he stepped closer, sniffing the object. His paws touched it cautiously, as though testing whether it might vanish. Finally, with a suddenness that made Ethan gasp, the cub wrapped his tiny legs around the teddy, buried his face into its fur, and let out a long, shuddering sigh. The sound that followed stunned them all, a low, steady rumble, uneven at first, but unmistakable. The cub was purring. For the first time since his rescue, he closed his eyes and drifted into sleep, deep, still peaceful sleep. Ethan whispered, "You're kidding me." "That's all it took." Claire smiled, tears in her eyes. "Sometimes medicine isn't enough. Sometimes healing begins with something soft. Here's the explanation behind what seems miraculous: comfort objects play a vital role in both humans and animals. For human children, a blanket or toy becomes a transitional object, helping them feel safe when separated from their parents. It offers familiarity, texture, and scent that signal security. In the same way, this black bear cub, ripped from his mother too soon, found in the teddy a substitute anchor, something to cling to when fear threatened to pull him under again. There are parallels across species. Therapy dogs calm veterans with PTSD. Horses are used in programs for children recovering from trauma. Even in zoos, keepers sometimes give young orphaned primates stuffed toys to replace the contact they've lost. Science may explain it as tactile comfort or sensory regulation. But to those watching in that moment, it felt like something more mysterious, a bridge between fear and peace. That night marked a turning point. Every evening after, the cub searched for his teddy before lying down. If it wasn't there, he whined until someone brought it back. He carried it clumsily in his mouth, dragged it across the bedding, and even tucked it under his chin. The staff began joking, no teddy, no sleep. But behind the laughter was awe. They were witnessing the truth that resilience sometimes arrives disguised as fragility. A toy meant for a child had become a lifeline for a wild animal. One evening, a new volunteer named Lucas tidied the enclosure and, not knowing the rule, placed the teddy on a shelf. The cub returned to his bed, looked around, and began to wail louder than ever before. The sound echoed through the sanctuary, startling owls and raccoons alike. Madison rushed in, alarmed. When she saw the empty bed, she asked, "Where's the teddy?" Lucas pointed, embarrassed. Madison retrieved it quickly and placed it back. The cub grabbed it instantly, pressed his face into it, and silence returned. Lucas looked stunned. "He acts like it's his mother." Madison answered quietly, "In a way it is. Here lies the lesson. Healing isn't always about restoring what was lost. Sometimes it's about creating a substitute that allows survival. The teddy couldn't feed the cub or teach him to climb trees, but it gave him the one thing no human could: emotional security in a world that had betrayed him." Ethan began noticing something else. The cub's energy during the day shifted. He played more, explored his enclosure, and practiced swiping at branches and climbing logs. He even splashed in a shallow tub of water, dragging the teddy to the edge as if inviting it to join. Restful nights were giving him strength for lively days. Healing wasn't just happening, it was accelerating. In a culture that often prizes toughness, this story reveals the paradox that softness can be the key to survival. For a predator destined to grow into a powerful black bear, it was not claws or teeth that saved him in those fragile weeks, but a tattered teddy bear. The staff began sharing the story with visitors. School groups listened wide-eyed as Madison explained how a simple stuffed animal became medicine. Donations increased, not just money, but boxes of toys sent by children across the state. Letters arrived too. "If the bear needs friends, please give him my teddy." The sanctuary became a place not only of rescue, but of connection. People realized that compassion could cross species, carried on the back of something as ordinary as a plush toy. In time, the teddy acquired a name: Scout, chosen by the volunteers. Scout became part of the sanctuary's legend, a symbol of the unexpected ways healing can unfold. But even with Scout at his side, the cub's journey was not finished. The teddy soothed his nights, yet the staff knew they faced a bigger question. What would his future look like? Could a bear so dependent on comfort, so shaped by human care, ever return to the wild? Or would his path lead elsewhere, toward becoming an ambassador for all wild animals in need of rescue? With each passing day, the cub grew stronger, more playful, and more attached to Scout. But as his body thrived, his story raised a new challenge, because no sanctuary can hold an animal forever. The question now was, what kind of life could this black bear have beyond the teddy weeks turned into months, and the black bear cub that once fit inside Claire's jacket no longer looked fragile. His fur filled in glossy and dark. His ribs disappeared beneath growing muscle, and his paws, once small enough to wrap around a thumb, spread wide and strong. He was on his way to becoming the kind of wild animal people rarely see up close: sleek, powerful, and unpredictable. But even as his body grew, one thing never changed. Wherever he went, the teddy bear went too. It started with small signs. The cub, now named Buddy, would drag Scout the teddy across his bedding before lying down. Then he began carrying it to other corners of the enclosure, near the water dish, up onto a log. Sometimes into the shallow pool where he splashed and rolled. When staff tried removing Scout for cleaning, Buddy protested immediately. He paced, whimpered, and searched every corner until the bear was returned. Only then would he settle. That's how the unwritten rule emerged. Teddy, no sleep. At first, the volunteers laughed. They joked about drafting it on a poster and hanging it on the wall. But soon they realized it wasn't just funny, it was serious. Forgetting the rule meant chaos. One evening, a new helper tidied the enclosure, and thinking the toy was unnecessary, placed it on a shelf. The result was unforgettable. Buddy returned to his bedding, looked around, and discovered Scout missing. What followed was a wail that shook the sanctuary. Owls in the rafters stirred. Foxes barked, raccoons chattered nervously. Within minutes, the whole place buzzed with restless energy, as if every animal sensed his distress. Dr. Madison rushed in. "Where's the teddy?" she demanded. The helper pointed sheepishly to the shelf. Madison grabbed it, dusted it off, and handed it back. Buddy clutched Scout with both paws, pressed his nose deep into the fur, and the noise stopped instantly. Within minutes, he was asleep, the sanctuary quiet again. The staff learned fast Scout was not optional. He was essential. Here's the explanation behind it. In animal psychology, comfort objects can function as extensions of maternal presence. For Buddy, Scout carried no scent of a bear, no warmth of a heartbeat. Yet the teddy provided familiarity, something stable in a world that had turned unstable overnight when the flood swept away his family. In clinging to Scout, Buddy was creating predictability, a sense of safe space he could control. Just as children carry blankets into new environments, Buddy carried his teddy into the unknown. And this is where the story widens. Many animals in sanctuaries develop attachments to objects. Orphaned elephants in Kenya are given blankets to simulate the touch of their mothers. Rescued primates often cling to stuffed toys until they're old enough to socialize with others. Even domestic pets, dogs and cats, seek comfort in soft toys during transitions. The pattern is clear. The need for comfort isn't a weakness, it's biology. Buddy's days soon filled with play. He chased fallen leaves across the enclosure, swatted at dangling ropes, and practiced climbing the logs volunteers placed for him. Sometimes he stalked Claire's shoelaces when she entered with food, crouching low, tail twitching before pouncing. His instincts as a predator were surfacing, but always with Scout nearby. He carried the teddy by its arm, by its leg, even by its head, dragging it across dirt and through water. The toy grew worn, its seams loosened, but still Buddy refused to let go. Ethan noticed something important. Buddy's dependence on Scout wasn't limiting his growth, it was enabling it. When the teddy was present, Buddy ate more, played more, and showed more curiosity. Without Scout, anxiety consumed him. This reflected a deeper truth: security fuels exploration. Only when we feel safe do we have the courage to grow. The sanctuary staff used Buddy's story during tours. Children pressed close to the enclosure glass, laughing as they watched a black bear cub tugging a teddy across the grass. Parents smiled at the sight, but their expressions often shifted to something deeper when Madison explained. He survived a flood, lost his mother, and wouldn't rest until he had this teddy. It saved his life as much as medicine did. That message reached people in ways charts and statistics never could. Donations increased. Letters arrived. One read, "Buddy reminds me of my son who sleeps with a stuffed dinosaur. Please tell him he's not alone." Vulnerability, even in the fiercest creatures, is not something to mock. It's something to recognize and honor. A predator still carries the need for comfort. A wild animal still seeks connection, and in witnessing that truth, people saw themselves. There was also a fresh perspective forming among the staff. They began to think differently about resilience. It wasn't just about physical strength or the ability to endure storms. It was about adaptation, about finding new ways to feel safe when the old ones are gone. For Buddy, resilience came in the form of a tattered teddy bear. For humans, it might come as a song, a photograph, a hand to hold. The teddy also sparked broader conversations about conservation. Visitors asked, "If floods hurt animals like this, what can we do?" Madison explained how climate change increases extreme weather events, putting wild animals at greater risk. Forest animals like black bears, deer, and foxes rely on stable habitats, but storms can strip those away overnight. Buddy's story became a living example of why sanctuaries matter, not only to rescue individuals, but also to remind people of the fragile balance between humans, wild animals, and the environment. Buddy continued to grow. By his first birthday, he weighed nearly 80 pounds. By 2, he was strong enough to topple logs and climb trees with ease. Yet no matter how big he became, Scout remained by his side. Volunteers mended the teddy repeatedly, sewing seams, patching holes, and even replacing stuffing. They joked that Scout had become the hardest-working volunteer at the sanctuary. The contrast was striking: a powerful black bear, claws, sharp muscles defined, carrying a ragged teddy as tenderly as a kitten. It was both comical and moving, and it left an imprint on everyone who witnessed it. Still, the staff knew they faced a difficult reality. Buddy's dependence on Scout hinted at something deeper. He was no longer fully wild. A truly wild bear wouldn't cling to toys, wouldn't accept human caretakers, and wouldn't linger by fences waiting for food. Releasing him into the forest would not only endanger him, but also put others at risk. He lacked the essential fear of humans that keeps wild bears alive. That realization carried both sadness and purpose. Buddy would not return to the forest, but he would carry a new role as an ambassador. His story and his teddy would teach thousands about compassion, conservation, and the truth that every life has worth. Buddy had grown into a powerful bear, yet he never let go of Scout. Visitors saw both strength and softness in him, and they began asking deeper questions, not about toys, but about what it means for humans and wild animals to share a fragile world. And that's where the story shifted from one bear's survival to the lessons he offered us all. Visitors never forgot the first time they saw Buddy. Some laughed when the big black bear came trotting out of his den, dragging Scout the teddy by one frayed arm. Others covered their mouths in surprise. The contrast was almost too much to process, a wild animal strong enough to tear through logs, carrying a stuffed toy like a child. But the laughter always quieted. People leaned closer, and in the silence that followed, lessons began to surface. Dr. Madison used those moments carefully. She would stand near the enclosure, waiting for the right time, then explain. When Buddy was rescued after the flood, he couldn't sleep. He was fading not from hunger, but from fear. This teddy gave him the comfort that nothing else could. It saved his life. Parents nodded slowly. Children clutched their own toys a little tighter. The story connected across ages because it was simple and true. Healing sometimes begins in the gentlest of places. But what does a teddy bear in the paws of a black bear teach us really? First, it teaches that strength is not the absence of vulnerability. Buddy grew into a 250-pound animal, yet he never let go of Scout. For him, resilience wasn't about ignoring fear. It was about finding a way to live with it. Humans often believe that survival means pushing past weakness, pretending it doesn't exist. Buddy's story flips that idea. It shows that clinging to comfort can be just as vital as learning to fight. Here's a clear example. A veteran once visited the sanctuary with his granddaughter. He watched Buddy press his nose into Scout before lying down for a nap. Later, he told Madison quietly, "That bear is me. I've got a blanket from the service I still sleep with. My family teases me, but I think I understand now it's not silly. It's survival." The granddaughter listened wide-eyed. In that moment, one bear with a teddy permitted a man to accept his own need for comfort. Another lesson lies in the role of safety. Fear had nearly destroyed Buddy. It wasn't hunger or injury that posed the greatest risk. It was exhaustion from constant vigilance. Only when Scout entered his world did he finally rest. The same is true for us. Food, shelter, medicine, these are foundations. But without peace, without the feeling of safety, none of them can sustain us for long. The teddy wasn't food, it wasn't medicine, but it created the conditions for both to work. Conservation isn't just about saving species in broad strokes. It's about seeing individuals. A black bear cub after a flood is not just another bear. He is Buddy, traumatized, clinging, surviving through something as ordinary as a toy. By telling his story, the sanctuary reminds us that wild animals are not statistics. They are individuals, each with needs, personalities, and vulnerabilities. And when we recognize that, our compassion deepens. Climate change makes this lesson urgent. Scientists report that extreme weather events, floods, storms, fires, are increasing in frequency and intensity. Every disaster displaces not only people but also forest animals, from deer to raccoons to black bears. Sanctuaries like Buddy's become lifelines, but they cannot keep pace without support. His story is more than sentimental. It's a warning. If a single cub depends on a teddy, what happens when hundreds more lose their mothers to the next storm? Visitors often asked, "What can we do?" Madison gave practical answers. If you ever find a wild orphaned animal, don't try to raise it yourself. Call a licensed wildlife rescue. Keep sanctuaries in mind when donating. Supplies like formula bedding and, yes, even toys can save lives. and share the stories. Every time someone tells Buddy's tale, awareness spreads. People who never thought about wild animals begin to care. The sanctuary also encouraged reflection. What objects help you feel safe? For some, it was a childhood blanket tucked away in a drawer. For others, a photograph, a piece of jewelry, or even a song. Recognizing that need in ourselves helps us see it in others, human or animal. Vulnerability is not weakness, it is the starting point for connection. Claire, who had been there from the moment Buddy was found, put it simply, that teddy wasn't just for him. It was for us too. It reminded us that no matter how wild or how human, every heart looks for a place to rest. The cub's story also offered a broader takeaway about coexistence. Wild animals live closer to us than we often realize. Black bears roam near towns and farms drawn by fruit trees and trash cans. People complain sometimes, even act with hostility. But when those same people saw Buddy with Scout, their view shifted. They saw not a threat, but a life complex, fragile and deserving of space. Conservation begins not with policies, but with perspective. One teacher who brought her class to the sanctuary later wrote in her report, "My students left with a new understanding. They no longer saw wild animals as distant creatures in documentaries, but as neighbors needing respect." Buddy and his teddy taught them empathy. Compassion bridges gaps that statistics never can. The sanctuary often ended tours with an invitation. "Think of Buddy tonight," Madison would say as you lie your head down. Remember that survival sometimes depends not on strength, but on softness. If you'd like to help animals like him, consider donating, volunteering, or even sending a simple toy. You never know what might become the next lifeline. The impact was measurable. Donations increased, more volunteers joined. Schools organized drives not only for food, but also for plush animals. The sanctuary became more than a rescue, it became a community symbol of resilience. Here's the mystery that lingers. Why does such a simple image, a black bear with a teddy, move us so deeply? Perhaps because it reveals a truth we often hide. We all need something to hold. We all need reassurance that the world, though harsh, also contains softness. And when we see that truth in a creature so different from us, it resonates all the more. Buddy had grown, and with Scout always by his side, he became more than a rescued cub. He became an ambassador, a living reminder of resilience. But as the years passed, his story took on an even greater weight, a legacy that would outlast even his own time at the sanctuary. Years passed. The cub who once clung desperately to survival grew into a formidable black bear weighing more than 200 pounds, his muscles thick beneath a gleaming coat. Visitors gasped when they saw him for the first time, moving with a predator's silent grace. But then without fail, they would spot Scout the teddy bear, patched and faded, clutched in Buddy's paws. And in that instant, awe turned into tenderness. The wild predator became a soul they could understand. The teddy aged alongside him. Its fur dulled from black to gray, one button eye dangled, and seams were repaired more times than anyone could count. Volunteers stitched Scout back together with heavy-duty thread stuffing, replaced with scraps of cotton, and holes patched with fabric squares donated by school children. Yet, to Buddy, Scout never changed. Every night, no matter how wild the day, Buddy curled around his companion, purring softly as if returning to that very first sigh of relief. Dr. Madison often lingered near the enclosure in the evenings. She had witnessed countless rescues over the years, but Buddy's devotion to Scout never lost its impact. She would watch him drag the teddy to a patch of sunlight, or into his den when rain fell, or up a log where he surveyed the sanctuary grounds. He reminds us, she would tell visitors, that even the strongest among us carry soft places. And that's not weakness, it's wisdom. One autumn, a group of veterans visited the animal sanctuary. They had come expecting an educational program about wildlife rescue. What they received was something different. As Buddy ambled into view with Scout in his mouth, the group fell silent. A retired soldier whispered, "That bear gets it." Later, during the Q&A, he shared his own story of clutching a worn blanket during sleepless nights after deployment. His voice trembled, If a bear can need that, maybe I don't have to feel ashamed. The sanctuary staff never forgot that moment. Buddy's story wasn't just about animals. It was about human healing too. The legacy of Buddy and Scout spread far beyond the fences. Children sent letters with drawings of bears hugging toys. Teachers used the story in classrooms to teach empathy. A local church organized a drive for plush animals, donating hundreds of teddies to shelters for both children and rescued wildlife. Each act echoed the same truth: compassion ripples outward. There is also ecological knowledge embedded in Buddy's journey. Black bears play a vital role in forest ecosystems. They disperse seeds through their diet, aerate soil while foraging, and maintain balance in populations of smaller forest animals. Saving one orphaned cub might seem like a small act, but every survivor carries with it the potential to sustain an ecosystem. When floods and storms strip habitats, bear animal rescue centers don't just protect individuals, they protect the living fabric of the forest. Resilience is not only about bouncing back, it's about carrying something forward. Buddy carried Scout not just as comfort, but as proof that the harshest storms can be survived with help. For us, resilience may mean carrying memories, symbols, or reminders that keep us steady when the world feels uncertain. The sanctuary staff often reflected on what Buddy had given them. Ethan, who once found the cub beneath flood debris, admitted that watching Buddy grow changed him. "He taught me patience," Ethan said. "That sometimes you don't need the perfect solution, you just need presence." He needed Scout, yes, but more than that, he needed us to respect what comfort looked like for him. Claire, the retired nurse, said Buddy reminded her that care isn't about fixing, it's about staying. He showed me that the smallest gestures, even something as silly as a teddy, can be sacred. This perspective reshaped the sanctuary itself. New volunteers were trained not just in feeding and cleaning, but in noticing, listening for what an animal needed beyond the obvious. A fawn was soothed by soft music. An injured hawk calmed when placed near another recovering bird. A raccoon refused food until given straw from its original den. Each story reinforced what Buddy had taught: healing often begins in places logic overlooks. There is, of course, mystery in all of this. Why did one particular teddy bear capture Buddy's devotion when dozens of other toys might have been offered? Why do wild animals sometimes bond with objects at all? Science points to sensory comfort, familiar textures, and survival instincts seeking substitutes. But perhaps the mystery is the point. Perhaps it reminds us that not everything needs to be explained. Some truths are meant to be experienced, felt, and carried forward without tidy answers. As the years stretched, Buddy became more than an ambassador. He became a symbol. Visitors didn't just see a black bear, they saw resilience wrapped around something soft. They saw strength tempered by tenderness. They saw reflected at them their own need for comfort in times of chaos. One crisp evening, long after the last tour of the day, Madison walked the grounds as she always did. She stopped at Buddy's enclosure. There he lay, massive paws curled protectively around Scout, his breathing deep and even. Moonlight lit the scene softly. Madison smiled, her heart heavy yet full. "You did it," she whispered. "You turned survival into something beautiful. And that is Buddy's legacy." He showed that animal rescue is not just about saving lives, it is about changing perspectives. He showed that wild animals are not distant creatures in documentaries, but neighbors with stories, feelings, and needs that mirror our own. He showed that even the smallest act, a donated teddy, can ripple into something transformative. Now comes the part where his story folds into ours. Because Buddy's journey is not just about a black bear in a sanctuary. It is about us, too. What are the Scout teddy bears in your life? The objects, memories, or relationships that give you peace when storms rise? Do you honor them, or do you hide them out of shame? Buddy invites us to see that needing comfort is not weakness. It is a strength because it allows us to rest, to heal, and to grow. When we extend that same compassion outward to wild animals, to each other, we create a safer world. Supporting wildlife rescue, protecting habitats, sharing stories like Buddy's. These are not small acts. They are Scout-sized anchors in a storm. tiny comforts that build resilience across an entire planet. So tonight, when you lie down, picture Buddy curled with Scout. Remember that even a powerful wild animal needs something soft to survive. Let that reminder settle in you. Then ask yourself, what can you carry forward to bring peace, not just to yourself, but to others? If this story touched you, help keep it alive. Support your local animal sanctuary or wildlife rescue. Send supplies or even share this video so more people can see how compassion saves lives. And before you go, take a moment to reflect. What is your Scout and who might need you to share it? If you felt the truth of this story, please like this video, subscribe to the channel, and hit the bell so you won't miss the next journey. Because the world is full of stories like Buddy's wild animals, forest animals, cute animals, each reminding us that strength and softness belong together. And together we can keep those stories alive.